Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Successfully Migrating Digital Collections, documenting Baylor University's migration of contents to Quartex. Brought to you by Library Journal and sponsored by Quartex. My name is Lisa Peet. I'm the news editor at Library Journal, and I will be your moderator. But before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Your screen is completely customizable. You can resize any of the windows and move them around, so feel free to adjust as needed to get the most out of your desktop space. If you accidentally close any of your windows, you can bring them back up by clicking the appropriate widget down at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions for our presenters during the webcast, and we sure hope you do, you can submit them through the Q&A window at any time, and we will address those at the end of the webcast. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list window, and you'll be able to download your CE certificate from the certification window once you've met the viewing requirements. You can tweet us at Library Journal with the hashtag LJQuartex. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, click on the Help widget, where you can find system requirements and FAQs. And if that doesn't resolve your issue, please send a note through the Q&A window. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Darryl Stuhr, Director of Digitization and Digital Preservation at Baylor University. Darryl oversees all digitization projects undertaken by the Digitization Projects Group. He also exercises primary oversight of the group's technology system, including data security and backups, systems integrity, and digital asset management. Martin Drewe is Head of Customer Engagement at Adam Matthew. Since joining Adam Matthew in 2014 as senior publisher, Martin has worked with a number of libraries and archives around the world. He's now working with some of these same archives and many others to explore open access publishing of their content through the Quartex Platform, which has been developed by Adam Matthew Digital specifically to showcase digital collections. And now I'm going to let the panelists take it away.
Many thanks, Lisa. This is Martin speaking. I'm going to very briefly run through a very quick introduction to Quartex and Adam Matthew, and then pass over to Darryl, and he's the real star of the show. He's been doing all the work on the migration. So he's going to run us through the actual migration process itself as well. Very briefly, to those of you joining us today who don't know Adam Matthew, I just want to give you a little introduction. Adam Matthew has been going for about 30 years. We started off as a publisher of microfilm collections and moved to digital about 15 years ago. Since then, we've published about 130 collections. We publish a maximum of 10 a year, with the emphasis on quality, obviously. And we publish across a range of subjects. I've got here on the slide, you might not be able to see in detail, but some examples of what we've published. For example, American Indian newspapers. We publish papers from the East India Company, from the British Library. We publish, one example here is 19th Century Literary Society, which is the John Murray Publishing Archive, which is fantastic, with the largest collection of Byronalia in the world as well. So just a few examples of the sort of thing that we do. Obviously, we publish all these digitally now, so we need a framework to do that, and Quartex is that framework. It's the software underlying all the collections we publish from now on. We have had previous iterations of that, but everything we publish in the future will be published on Quartex as well, and we'll gradually migrate our backlist across too. We have one other collection I just want to highlight today. This is the Mass Observation Project. Now, Mass Observation itself is probably our flagship collection, certainly our biggest selling collection. And this is documenting the social research project that went on in the UK between 1937 and 1967. The Mass Observation Project is the follow-on from that, so it's sort of the adjunct to it. And this collection publishes this week. It's the first collection we've published on the Quartex software. And as I say, from now on, we'll be publishing everything else on Quartex too. Now, Quartex is different because this is the first time we've licensed our software to external parties, to libraries, archives, and any other institution that wants to publish their digitized archival content. So we've obviously had lots of considerations to bring in there, and it's been great working with partners such as Baylor and Darryl through that development process. Development is obviously ongoing, and we're listening to customers and trying to meet as many needs as we can as we go. So very briefly about Quartex itself. It is secure, scalable. It obviously needs to scale. It's cloud-based on AWS. It offers hosting and streaming of AV content as well. So all your audio-visual content can be hosted and shown through Quartex. And also, in addition to that, it allows some full-text search features as well. So if you do have AV content hosted in Quartex, you can run an auto-transcription actually in the platform to make that full-text searchable. Obviously, you can do the same sort of thing with print content so that you can use in-platform OCR to make that searchable. And you have exclusive access to our handwritten text recognition software, which makes manuscript searchable with a very high degree of accuracy as well. Quartex also allows creation of digital exhibits, so you don't have to slavishly reproduce your digital collections, though you might want to do that too. You can reproduce digital exhibits across different collections, and they can be published on a permanent or temporary basis, obviously. It's highly configurable, so it allows lots of different navigation options, and these are built into the platform. I think Darryl will talk a bit about use of the CMS. Though we'll cover the migration as the bulk of the presentation. Finally, it supports custom metadata schemas in the platform, and I know Darryl will certainly talk about that too. So just a very quick overview. Of course, if you have got any queries or you want to know more about Quartex, I've got a link to our demo site in the slides here. We'll feature these at the end as well, but you can get in touch with any of our team, and we'd be talk through any details or answer questions today as well, of course, if you have. So after that very brief introduction, I think we get to the meat of the webinar, and I'll pass over to Darryl as well to run us through what he's been doing for the recent months. Darryl, over to you.
All right, thank you, Martin. Yeah, for nearly a year at this point. So anyway, thanks, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. It's great to be able to talk to you all about our digital collection migration, especially at this point where the bulk of the work has been done. We've built the majority of our 63 collections from incredible libraries and archives across campus. We have a strong collaborative relationship with the folks that work in the libraries you see listed here on the slide. We've worked on many projects throughout the years. They've supported us by helping with equipment purchases to put in the Digitization Center, and funding at times for temporary positions for special projects that we work on with them to help build the 63 collections over nearly 20 years now. And so it's been a nice, long collaborative process with them. Just want to mention a few of our successful projects and collections before moving on to the migration. One of them, our Spencer Collection of American Popular Sheet Music, is out of our Fine Arts Library archive. It contains nearly 30,000 pieces of music collected by Francis Spencer and purchased by the Baylor Libraries back in 1965. This collection was the first large collection we migrated to Quartex. It's our most accessed collection throughout the years and our oldest collection. The collection contains pieces that span the late 18th to early 20th century. Along with its music, complements other areas of study with its cover art and lyrics, including Texas and American history, art, political science, and sociology. And it's arranged in over 200 subject categories. Our Browning Letters collection from the Armstrong Browning Library on campus contains correspondence to and from Elizabeth and Robert Browning. These letters are scattered across the globe, but we can bring them together virtually online. Building this letter collection and getting the opportunity to work collaboratively with other institutions has been rewarding for the libraries and for the team. We have letters from Wellesley College in this collection, Ohio State, Ransom Center at University of Texas, Balliol College, Texas A&M, and we're currently working with other institutions like Trinity College in Hartford and also Eaton College. And finally, I'll mention our Black Gospel Music Restoration Project, the Royce Darden Collection. This project started back in 2007. The goal of this project is to find gospel music, digitize it, catalog and preserve a digital copy, as well as make as many copies as possible accessible online. So for this collection, we're proud to have some of the digitized audio tracks in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Thanks, Darryl. Great to get a flavor of some of the amazing collections that you have and the diversity across them. And all these collections, these 63 collections, are digitized, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Over about a 20-year period.
Yeah, so can you give us an idea of the result? Because you've got decent resource to do that, obviously.
We do. We've been very fortunate. The group that administers Quartex is the Digitization and Digital Preservation Services Group, and we operate the Digitization Center in the library. We opened this facility up in 2008. So it's a 5,000 square foot space containing specialized digitization equipment for digitizing books. We can do maps, blueprints, paintings, various audio formats like analog discs, cassettes, and reel-to-reels. Also a variety of video formats, Betacam, Betamax, etc. And then more recently, we can now do 8mm and 16mm film. Quartex comes with a nice exhibit feature, which we plan to use more extensively in the future for highlighting collections, especially new collections, or when we add to new collections. We tested it out a bit by highlighting some of the equipment in the center. So the exhibit contains videos of some of our equipment in action, and you could check that out later at some point using that link below.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Darryl. And we share relevant URLs later as well. But we'll just show the site briefly at the end of the presentation. We can show that you can find that as well. But so for all this digitized content you had, Darryl, you were making this available to the public. What were you using previously?
Right. So we were a previous CONTENTdm user, started using it back in 2003, first running our own instance on campus with our own hardware, and then about 6 years ago moving to a hosted version just to kind of make things a little bit easier on us, especially as the digitization demands were increasing in our center. So some of the issues that were lacking in CONTENTdm are issues that we were facing, some system issues or limitations, and these are issues that we had to deal with over the course of about 10+ years. Some of these may be fixed now, but nevertheless, we had to wrestle with them at some point. So first, we really wanted an easier way to batch update metadata. Our projects go back so far, back to 1999 when we weren't doing things as correctly as we should have. And so we really needed an easier way to batch update our metadata. And unfortunately, CONTENTdm functionality would not meet our needs over the many years to do this. Also, the CONTENTdm project client, which is the software necessary for uploading and editing records, it was outdated, and at some point, development ceased on the application. It was also a Windows-only product. The web configuration utility for customizing pages was not very intuitive. Functionality was a bit limited and became more limited when security issues were found in the more recent years. So at some point, the development of the CONTENTdm version 6 interface stopped to move and shift to a responsive design interface. But when the responsive design launched, we were able to test it, and we just found that it was too buggy to make the move to responsive. So we ended up living with the bugs in version 6 until our move to Quartex now. Also, there's no batch editing of public access permissions. So say you wanted to lock down a portion of a collection, and maybe that involved 100 or 200, 300 records. Unfortunately, this was a one-by-one task to lock each of them down, unless you were locking down a whole collection, which was easy, but we don't currently have one of those collections. And so one of the methods to lock down items is IP filtering for access control. And that was available through CONTENTdm, but unfortunately, it only worked with the first 5,000 IP addresses and would unfortunately block IP addresses over the 5,000. Again, this may be something that was fixed, but we had to wrestle with it at some point. Also, our instance during an update at some point lost full text search highlighting in the version 6 interface. And the only way to fix this was to commit and move over to the responsive design interface. And like I said, we weren't ready to do that. And overall, we just felt like the development of the interface was just generally slower than we would have liked, slower than expected.
And what of those issues do you think caused you the most frustration, would you say? I mean,
sure. Yeah. Regressive bugs were a big one. We would kind of wait for an update, hoping a new feature would come along, and unfortunately, sometimes some of those bugs would show up, and you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sort of thing. That was the most frustrating. But also, I'll add to that the metadata overlay. It was a feature that other systems provide, that functionality, and we really wanted it. But at the time we were communicating with them, it wasn't something that it sounded like was on their roadmap, on their development roadmap. So we really wanted that. And so that at times when we had to do a lot of work in metadata, caused some frustration.
Because it was just too hard to edit your metadata?
Yeah, too hard. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, or time consuming. Yeah.
Time consuming,
but still, though, taking on a migration is quite a thing. So what was it that finally made you decide to do it? And why did you choose Quartex to move to?
Sure. Well, a few things that attracted us to Quartex. One, easy to use CMS for customizing the pages in the site. During training, we received a 30-minute session on this. Our digitization coordinator, Allison Riley, who's got no HTML or development experience, customized all of these pages following that 30-minute training session. And she also migrated all of our landing page content from CONTENTdm to Quartex. On the administrative side, we really like the filtering options that are available when wanting to do some bulk editing right in the browser. And overall, the web administrative interface is quite powerful. So, and as I mentioned, we really like the metadata overlay capabilities. As I mentioned, it's a feature we always wanted with CONTENTdm, the ability to download the metadata from your collection and then edit it in an interface of your choice, whether it's Google Sheets, OpenRefine, Excel, and then take this data and then overwrite it was just huge for us. And all of this with our own unique identifiers that we've created. That is the link between the metadata and the items in the Quartex system. So other thing, cross-platform uploader. At this point, about half of our machines in our center are Macs, and so the ability to download an uploader for the Mac or PC was quite convenient. And finally, a well-implemented controlled vocabulary interface. Our previous metadata librarian configured the controlled vocabulary fields for us, and terms that do not fit will show up in the interface as needing approval. They can be deleted or combined with other terms. So about 5 years ago, we looked into other possible solutions to replace CONTENTdm, but we never really hit the is a migration worth all the work mark. And, you know, do the benefits outweigh the work it will take to do a system migration? And so with a small number of staff members available to work on a migration, the gain needed to be worth it. And we felt like we finally found that with Quartex.
That's good, thank you. I'm glad, yeah. That slide, I think, showed some of the CMS styling options available. Yeah, there we go. So in Quartex, just if you're wondering what that visual was. But you can see a bit more of if you want to see a bit more of the back-end functionality of Quartex, obviously you can contact Adam Matthew for a demo, anyone. But now, Darryl, once you decided that it was worthwhile moving to Quartex, can you tell us how you actually took that on, how you approached the process?
Sure, absolutely. So, to migrate, we exported the metadata from CONTENTdm at the collection level as tab delimited files. We included all of the compound object and the image level metadata in these file exports. So CONTENTdm was our definitive set of metadata for the collections. Over the years, as we worked in CONTENTdm, any updates that we needed to do to the metadata, they were done in CONTENTdm. So We took advantage of this opportunity to fix some issues like the controlled vocabulary and ID issues that we wanted to fix years ago. The move to Quartex was kind of a nice catalyst for this. So our very early digital collections have extensive schema, and so a handful of collections had their schema simplified, especially when we learned that many of the fields were hardly used over the years, so we took the opportunity to do that as well. So we used Google Sheets to edit and make these changes because this provided simultaneous multi-user access for the couple people that were working on this. There's a nice history function in Google Sheets that we could use, that if we did some extensive processing or manipulating of the data and we weren't happy with the results, it was easy to roll back. So our metadata librarian, who was already working on a library systems platform migration, implemented and enhanced our CV lists, our controlled vocabulary lists in Quartex for us prior to starting. We created the collections and used Quartex field mapping to create a template to handle the import of the CONTENTdm data into Quartex for each collection. So once a field mapping was created for a collection, it was saved and always available for re-uploads or re-uploading metadata if we forgot something and needed to do that. So we took advantage of it several times because sometimes we wouldn't notice something until after an upload. And it's very easy to fix in the spreadsheet and then simply re-upload against the template overriding the data. So that was very nice. We also created metadata groups during the migration. We started with a standard set since all collections contain a core set of metadata. Because some of our collections have extended schema, we added customized fields to either a metadata group of a similar type, say, for example, a metadata group for newspapers, for correspondence or annuals. Then at times, if necessary, we can add a metadata group for a specific collection if it was very collection specific. So when creating the collection, when creating the new collection, you have the option to associate any of these metadata sets that you create and manage with the collection. So it's a very nice feature. And after we were past, say, maybe the first 10 collections, this started to save us time, configuration time, when setting up metadata for new collections. So we made kind of an early decision to re-OCR all of our text-based images, so search terms would be properly highlighted in Quartex, and so we could take advantage of a newer version of the Abby OCR engine. Much of our original OCR was generated with Abby version 8, and Quartex is using version 11, and so we wanted to take advantage of that as well. Quartex will import your Abby-generated OCR XML data, but it was something that we just passed on just because we didn't want to make use of the older OCR. Originally, we relied on the CONTENTdm project client in our workflow to do all of the compression of our images during the upload. Before the migration, we wanted more control over the access files at the collection level in Quartex and say, we want to set the compression level like this. We want to set the resolution like that for each of the collections. And so, we didn't simply move our assets from CONTENTdm into Quartex. We actually went back to our preservation files, compressed each collection, and we used ImageMagick on a pretty powerful Linux server to create these new access surrogates. And so we wanted more efficient compression. We wanted to reduce the footprint, especially when we're talking about 1 million images.
Yeah, a lot of images. Yeah, so quite a few points you raised there. I mean, one I'll just pick up on. With your metadata preparation, were you actively thinking about the presentation of metadata on the site as you prepared it? Was that one of the key elements?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely, yes.
And what was the experience of using the OCR facility compared to in Quartex compared to CONTENTdm, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. CONTENTdm, and I'm not sure if they've changed this over the last year, but relies on OCR in the client workstation. So we had to have enough power for our uploading workstation, for the workstation was dedicated to the project client in order to process that OCR. So metadata, images, and OCR processing, and actually digital access, the access surrogate processing all takes place on those workstations. So at that time, we needed heftier workstations to be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time. it's much easier to get this uploaded and have this take place as a, an additional service that runs in Quartex that we could set to run at any time and not tie up one of our workstations. So I think it's a little bit better design.
Yeah. So obviously, this is already looking like it was a time-consuming process. But you set your timeline, I suppose, and I understand that you stuck to it quite well as well. Can you run through how you established that and the resources you had to do it?
Definitely. Yeah, surprisingly stuck to it, because back in the summer 2019, we were just kind of pulling this stuff, it felt very random. And then it started to come together as we got in the fall semester. And so this is the timeline that we set. So tested and training at the end of the 2019 summer semester. What we did do was we prioritized the collection based on their popularity. So what collections were we going to migrate first? So we identified the top 10 collections that were the most accessed collections since 2013. So two of us had about an hour and a half training on this before we were off in testing. So we really felt like an hour and a half was a good enough amount of time for us to actually get testing on the site. So for the migration, we mostly had two full-timers, myself and our digitization coordinator, Allison, and we both gave about 60 to 100% of our time throughout any given week during the migration from the fall semester until we went live March 30th. So I will say that Allison handled all of the CMS customization. And then at some point, I believe it was February, she popped over to help me with some of the data migration, which helped out tremendously. I don't know that we would have made that deadline in time. We also had a full-time temporary employee that the Dean of Libraries provided for us, which was extraordinarily helpful, Evangeline. And then 29-hour-a-week grad student, Sam, who also helped us. So they handled most of the manual work at times when we had to do manual work, especially with IDs and metadata. And at times they had to provide detective services when objects just weren't matching up with the metadata IDs, especially in some of the older collections. So also want to mention just a few others in our group that indirectly helped. Stephen, Travis, and Libby. They took on additional duties so that Allison and I really could focus on the migration, and we did. Allison and I spent the vast majority of our time on the migration, especially towards the end. So we used Basecamp to communicate questions after the training to Quartex support. And as we were getting familiar with the platform, we would just fire off questions and quickly get those answered through Basecamp. And then had a couple of touch-based meetings, but that's all we really needed to get going. Now, obviously, for our group, we were very familiar with CONTENTdm, running a local host instance and then moving to hosted. So we had a good idea how the digital collections work, and I think that plays a big part in not needing too much training. But anyway, our first goal was to move the first 10 collections by winter break, and we did manage to do that, met the deadline. But more importantly, we created a model for nearly each of the compound object types in CONTENTdm. And so we wanted to apply this model to similar collections moving forward in early 2020, and we were able to do that. So we managed to work